My name is Jennifer Sanborn, Program Director of In Support of Excellence at the American Baptist Home Mission Societies. And today I'm joined by the three authors of Judson Press's newest release, Health, Holiness, and Wholeness for Ministry Leaders. Welcome back to Jay Matthews, Christina Gutierrez, and Ross Peterson, all of the Midwest Ministry Development Service. This is the second in a multi-part conversation about this book, designed to bring you into conversation with its authors, with its concepts, and to get you curious about how to use this as a coaching tool in your own leadership and ministry. So in today's conversation, we are going to focus a bit on the idea of staying healthy. The first word in this title here, Health, Holiness, and Wholeness for Ministry Leaders. And I have to say to the authors that when I hear the word health, I probably settle into too narrow a focus. I think of being there at my biennial physical, asking the nurse, are the blood pressure numbers okay? You know, the kind of narrowest definition of health. But you speak of health in a very expansive way. And so I would love for you to share how you think of health for ministry leaders. And Jay, how about you start us off?
Okay. Well, I think, when I think of health and ministry, a lot of it is sort of like your checkup. It's there's a lot that goes into physical health, diet, exercise, and but when I think of ministry and health, a lot of it has to do with attitude, and that can make all the difference in the world. I think that. Well, this whole notion that I'm okay no matter what gives a kind of calm presence that is very good for your health. And in response to this question, I would like to just talk about a part of one person's ministry, which I think demonstrates some things. Can I take a minute or two to do that?
Please do.
This guy was one of my brightest and best, not because I saw him as a client, but because, he was actually a minister in Boston when I went to seminary, and I attended his church occasionally. A good sermon, there has to be two criteria to a good sermon or to good preaching. One, it has to make a difference, which means that it has to produce some kind of change. And usually the best sermons don't go for huge change, but just change, definite change. But the other criteria is that the minister has to have had fun putting it together. Absolutely. And that's where the health comes in. That's the attitude. Now, this guy, the way he did that, it's what I call the Roberta Flack approach to preaching. From the standpoint of the parishioner, it's killing me softly with your sermon. His rule was every sermon I preach is going to be 12 minutes long. 12 minutes, maybe somewhere between 11 and 13, but not outside, those limits. Now, what that meant is he had a lot of fun, taking whatever he had in mind and condensing it to 12 minutes. There was no fluff. Nothing was trite. Every single word had a purpose. And that was a challenge to him and one which he thoroughly enjoyed. So he had fun. And that was health, self-care. The other thing about it that I think contributes to excellence is that it showed his people that they could count on him. There was something very tangible and real, and you better believe important, that they could count on. His sermons were going to go no longer than 12 minutes. And to me, there's a lot about that that's the embodiment of the connection between health and excellence. Well, I'll stop there.
Say, Jay, that was such a prime example of how I felt reading this book, that there was a little bit of curious wisdom that you would draw me in with. I did not think the 12-minute sermon story was going to result in that boundary being the source of fun. I thought you were going to tell me that's why he was stuck and how he had to break out of that. So I love that in your storytelling, both here in this conversation and in the book, you kind of draw me in with one expectation, and then suddenly there's a turn that challenges me to look in another way. And I'll say,
Well,
you know, when I picked up the book, I thought this is an hour's read or two. It is so full. So I think you took the same approach of, we can't put it all. We need to make sure every word is essential that's in here.
you know, there's that goes back to, there's a kind of dialectic that's makes for excellence in ministry, and it's, on one side, it's being totally dependable. There's something about you that's very important that people can always depend upon. It's unfailing. At the same time, you're full of surprises. I mean, people listen to you, follow you, because I don't know what you're going to say next, and that never detracts from the dependability, but keeps people interested. So I think the use of surprise is a very important tool in ministry.
Well, you do it quite well, let me say.
Thank you.
Christina and Ross, anything you want to add to the idea of health for ministry leaders? How you think of that?
Yeah, I think a holistic, broad view of health is pretty essential in ministry. The quality of one's relationships, your how you handle food in your life, and your physicality as a person. You're keeping yourself mentally engaged and interested, making space for a spiritual life. It's kind of astonishing how many clergy are sort of professionally spiritual, but their personal spiritual life is always pushed off to the side. And I think to realize, you know, what's the area you tend to neglect, and to use both your inner coach and your outer coaches to help you stay in touch with that area. I think we're all have the potential to go off the rails in different kinds of ways, and to know, okay, this is the thing that I've got to watch where I become unhealthy. And it's often a very good barometer. If I'm not managing stress well, here's how it shows up for me. I start doing this, or I stop doing that. So.
Wise words.
Yeah, we use a rather lengthy self-care and wellness inventory with the people that come to Midwest, and it's rather detailed, but it's divided into four categories. And to me, it is really the same vision of health that is given to us in Luke 2:52. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. And, you know, there's what we've been talking about, the physical health, the spiritual health, the psychological health, and the relational health. And I think that the key for pastors is to balance those and not look at one over the other, because it's what we tend to do anyway, right? We tend to look at one over the other, but the real key is to balance those four to be healthy.
A lifelong practice, that is for sure. And I imagine that there are a number of readers who were suddenly remembering completing that inventory as you
Sure. It's long.
A valuable deep dive into one's own story and self. So in the book, you describe a period in the mid-1980s. I'll confess I was approaching my teenage years then, so I remember this a bit, when clergy health became the kind of centerpiece of every conversation, every denominational gathering, and it became the centerpiece out of a crisis. Clergy were burning out. And there was a sense that a lot had been invested in folks to prepare them for ministry, and they were taking rapid exits. And so I'm curious, you know, I said that I have served as a pastor, that I grew up in a family of pastors, you know, my dad, both my grandfathers, so it was kind of the family business. So I had a front row seat to some of the kind of successes of tending health in those realms, and also some of the failings of that. And I say somewhat confessionally, I don't customarily think of clergy as being good tenders of their own health. Now, maybe that's my bias because I had too close a seat, but I'm curious what you think are the factors, either inside or outside, that contribute to clergy putting one or more of those categories on the back burner.
Jeez.
Well,
Don't look at me. Well, you know, martyrdom as a one-time courageous event in the service of a value that is bigger than life is one thing. Martyrdom as an ongoing lifestyle is for the birds. There's a technical name for it. It's called masochism. And, you know, if the congregations tend after a while to take on the personality of their leader. And I can't imagine anything worse than a congregation full of masochists. It's sort of like they might as well put a sign outside saying, the love of God is not welcome here. And for many pastors, it's like they should wear that sign on the top of their heads where God can see it, saying the love of God is not welcome here, which is really pretty stupid when you think about it. I'll stop there.
I'm not sure how many church signs we'll see popping up with that, but I bet it would get a few people through the door. Curiosity for sure. Ross or Christina, are there obstacles that you think are just kind of built in some ways?
Well, I think one piece that fits into this is it can be hard to measure what you're accomplishing in ministry. And so one way of measuring that pastors use is how much I'm suffering. I must be doing good ministry because I'm really uncomfortable and I'm overextended, and back when I did my CPE and was an over-responsible, hardworking CPE student, my supervisor at one point said, you know, just because something is making you suffer doesn't necessarily mean it's God's will for you. And I thought, oh, really? I hadn't considered that before. And I think it is an easy trap to fall into where this must be genuine ministry because it hurts so much.
That's really interesting to follow that thread of thought, Ross, and what that means to pastors. One of the things I was thinking was in your question about the obstacles to health for pastors is that I think that the COVID pandemic has brought this more to the fore, but you know, I think a lot of pastors are still have the same expectations from the 1980s, 1990s for what congregational pastoring is, and what expectations are, what they should be doing. Lots of shoulds involved in job descriptions of pastors, and no kind of updating of how life has changed in all those years, and how maybe ministry or the ministry that they do also needs to change. I just think that this pandemic with COVID and what pastors are going through really brings that to a fore. And instead of seeing it as something that is a horrible change to my ministry, seeing it as an opportunity to reevaluate what I do and how I can be more effective is, you know, so the obstacle to health is both out there and inside the pastor. It's out there in the church that they still have these expectations because that's all they know, and pastors as well, not thinking about ways that they can engage in this conversation with the people in their churches, and also these personal needs that pastors often have to fulfill certain functions in the church that need to be dealt with.
I feel like there were probably 20 things that I could dig in on there. It's theological. It's part of our own history. It's part of the history of congregations and how they function and how we do or do not adapt as time changes. It occurred to me as you were speaking, Christina, that I wonder if one of the obstacles, you know, if we imagine that the church of today is still the church of the 1980s, do I imagine that my health of today is still my health of the 1980s when I, you know, as I said, was a teenager and could really on a dime kind of change one thing and dramatically alter the course. So so much to think about and dig in on there, and thank you for that. I'll say for me, as I was reading through the book and its focus on health, one of the most helpful chapters for me distinguished between self-care, which gets a lot of kind of buzz in the current culture, and self-concern, which I will say is not a phrase that I've heard used often, though I see evidence of self-concern all over the place. So it was a really helpful word for me, or phrase. So help us to understand these concepts and how we understand or relate to them in terms of tending to our own health. Self-care, self-concern. What are these?
Two from you, Jay.
Well, I think they often start at the same place, but there's a big difference between the two. Self-concern is really nothing but worry, and it gets in the way of a lot of things. Self-care is, well, good self-care is action, and it's a program, thought out scheme, plan, way of doing things. And we talk about the importance of going to troubled waters. Well, if you go to troubled waters, there is always a personal cost to that. And along with the personal cost is an increased need for self-care. And and self-care has to be specific. And I think one of the times when that comes into play is when hot fudge sundaes becomes health food. If I'm going to do something that's going to take courage, and I'm not a courageous person, but it's the best thing to do, so I'm going to have to do it. But if I do it, I'm sure going to reward myself later with that hot fudge sundae, and that helps me do it. That helps me do it, but it also keeps me, in the long run, keeps me healthy, keeps my attitude healthy. I don't resent having to do the thing that stretches me that way. And partly I don't resent it because I'm going to get that hot fudge sundae. That's just one small example of what healthcare I think is about.
You are indeed full of surprises, because I remember reading that in the book. And even though I had already read it, I again thought, listening to you now, that you were going to say the hot fudge sundae was the unhealthy approach. And then you say, no, it's a reward. I love that you keep me guessing. But that sense of not presuming that courage is something that either comes naturally or that we should just kind of walk on from, really pausing for a moment and celebrating when we've risen to an occasion, when we've done something that's really difficult.
Right.
I appreciate that notion of self-care. How about Christina or Ross? Anything you want to say about self-care or self-concern?
Well, piece I would go ahead. Go ahead. No?
Go ahead, Ross.
Okay. Yeah, I just to kind of build on Jay's idea that self-concern really often ends up being just kind of rumination, right? And I'm reminded, if you want to get theological about it, St. Augustine's definition of sin is being curved in on yourself. And I think self-concern is being curved in on yourself in an unproductive way. And in contrast, good self-care has sort of the taste of freedom to it. It's something I'm choosing. There's not a sense of being trapped. It's expansive. And that if I'm feeling spacious, that's a sign that there's been adequate self-care. If I'm feeling cramped and turned into myself, that's a sign that, to me anyway, that I've lapsed into self-concern.
And that spaciousness is what allows you to deal with the troubled waters, and to put your self-concern to the side so that you can operate from a position of strength in your role as a pastor. Yeah, it's all interconnected, and it really does start with self-care, in my opinion.
Yes.
The book also talks about the distinction between practices, boundaries, and monitoring. I think those are the three. And I found that really helpful to give meaning, and the importance of self-care. So that practices are the self-care practices that you do, that you will do. Boundaries are what you won't do. And monitoring is making sure that you follow through. I'm paraphrasing.
That's good.
But it just all starts, it all starts with self-care, to give you the spaciousness in order to deal with the complexities of ministry.
So I'm going to spring on you an unexpected question, interviewer's prerogative here. Is there something that you each do for self-care that you feel is really essential? Obviously, some of these might be personal and private, but is there something that you say, you know, if I'm asked for an example, this is always what I point to. This is part of my practice. Christina, you're nodding. Is there something that comes to mind?
I'm nodding. I think that for me, I am the only extrovert. I'm sure I'm the only extrovert in this group here. So for me, you know, having regular contact with my support system, and that's professional and personal. And I will say that, you know, all of my professional support started retiring, so I didn't have natural places to talk about, you know, work and, you know, things that were going on. And so I started spiritual direction because I needed somebody to talk to. And I found that a very, very, very healthy self-care practice too.
I'm the only extrovert living in a house of introverts. I feel you, Christina. We can call one another.
She suffers so much.
Jay or Ross, what is an act of self-care or a practice of self-care that's important for you?
Oh, mine is kind of overwhelming. And Chris hit it on the head. As an introvert, and I spend a lot of my time with cows, goats, and chickens in retirement, which gives me a chance to, well, what I'm doing is writing in my head a mystery. I've got 200 pages of a mystery memorized. Some of it's already typed out. I think it's very good, by the way. But it is my self-care. I thoroughly enjoy doing this. It's certainly an introverted way of going about self-care, but for me it works. It really works. And whether this thing gets published or not, it will have been worthwhile, no matter what.
I look forward to the next twists and turns and surprises, especially in a mystery. How about you, Ross?
Yeah, for me, I think a key piece is staying in touch with my body. I spend a lot of time drifting up into my head, and whether it's doing yoga or doing meditation practices that are focused on staying in touch with my physicality, that's always healing. It's always surprising. I guess to go back to Jay's concept, that's where, oh, wow, I didn't notice that. And it's really life-giving. And when I neglect it, it has an effect. There's that old story about, who's it, Yasha Heifetz, I guess, who says, if I don't practice the violin one day, I can tell the difference. If I don't practice it 2 days, the critics can tell. If I don't practice 3 days, everybody can tell. And I think with our self-care practices, for me, my physicality, if I neglect that just a few days, everybody can tell. And it's not a good thing. So consistency is good.
In a few minutes, we're going to talk about a grade yourself health assessment that you put in the book, and I suddenly have the idea we could give it to those who are around us to grade us.
No.
How consistent are that?
It is a great idea.
I have to do this. We've got plenty of time as a family this summer, so always looking for opportunities to know ourselves and one another better. But before we get to that assessment, I just want to situate us in the context in which we're speaking. It is, of course, our hope that people will be reading this book and joining us in this conversation for years to come. And so it's important to say that we are talking on Tuesday, June 16th, 2020. And everyone's ears, as they hear the year 2020, are going to say, oh my goodness, how did you survive? We are living at the critical juncture of two or more, really, pandemics. One that came upon us seemingly without warning, the novel coronavirus, COVID-19, called lots of different things, but has put more of us in Zoom rooms like this for our work than ever before. And then, of course, one that has persisted across centuries, racism. We are probably each of us kind of contending moment by moment, hour by hour with how these appear in our own communities. And it strikes me that they're really critical to health in both instances. And so I'm going to just take a few minutes to talk about something in the book and connect it to this. And I hope you'll help me to do this because I think it's complex work. But I was struck that in the book you described healthy, whole ministry leaders as able to carry their responsibilities with a kind of weightlessness. Maybe this connects, Jay, to that notion of it's all going to be okay. I'm going to be all right. That when I have assurance of that and I really invest and believe in that I can carry big responsibilities without them feeling heavy. That is your distinction, not mine. It feels very wise, and I've been thinking a lot about that. But I have to say that we are living in a moment that for me feels heavy. And so I'm wondering if you would each speak to kind of how these connect for you. Is there a way to take the heaviest of things, unemployment rates that were unimaginable just months ago, the kind of pouring out of centuries of pain, and how do we carry those as ministry leaders? Christina, you already mentioned pastors serving in the midst of COVID-19 and some of the unique challenges of that, but there's a question embedded in here somewhere. Is there a weightlessness to this yet to come? And how do we carry these heavy things through these days?
Well, probably across the board, I've heard from pastors that their workload has at least doubled, that they are working much more than they had previously. And part of a lot of that is because they have to learn how to do ministry in ways that they've never done it before. And the other part is the technology that has to be used that, either they're not comfortable with or their congregation's not comfortable with. But the pastors who seem to be doing, even with the new workload, the pastors who seem to be doing it and maintaining a life balance, that's saying they're enjoying this new change, are the pastors who are really living into that weightlessness, that everything's going to be okay. They're adapting. They're able to adapt and look at things in a new way, and they're calling on people in the church to also. They are also helping. This is the position of strength. They're helping people in the congregation get in touch with new ways to serve, and helping them to also be the best they can be. And it's all going together for this kind of air of weightlessness. So that's my observation. I know that Jay has some thoughts about weightlessness and
Well,
this issue.
Ross does too. Um, well, this doesn't address the racial issue, at least I don't think so. But the COVID crisis really kind of puts us staring in the face of death. And part of the weightlessness, or part of the knowing I will be okay, goes back to our resurrection faith. And I think that's probably the biggest part of our faith, that the most radical thing about our faith is this notion that death is not the end. And as tragic and sad and all of that as it can be, there is more. And you have to sort of be in touch with the more to feel like you're going to be okay. And not only for yourself, but to try to help other people into that sense of I'm okay, I will be okay. It doesn't necessarily change anything you do, but it does make an impact on your quality of life through your own emotional health. One of the biggest challenges, there are other things that go along with the crises that we're facing. I think the sense of what's the word that I couldn't think of before? Our beloved president majors in it.
Narcissism?
No, the other word. No, geez, we're in trouble here. Anyway,
not with me.
We're at each other's throats. It's a sense of
Divided?
Well, being divided. Which makes it much harder to follow the injunction of judge not. When I go to Kroger's, get ready to put on my mask, and see a bumper sticker next to me that says masks are for faggots, it's very hard for me not to judge. And I have to make sure that's part of my person and not part of my role. But even in my person, I'm trying to overcome this stupid tendency of judging others, which is unhealthy. But boy, that makes it harder for me during this time. So in a sense, part of the impact is I have to work harder at maintaining my own separation of self and role. So that's.
As you were each talking, and then I want to hear from you as well, Ross. I almost shifted in my own thinking from feeling the heaviness of this moment as something that is like coming crushing down on top of us to something that is so heavy we have to carry it together. That the weightlessness might be found in some ways in that kind of communal sharing in the burden of this time, whether that is wearing the mask because I care for your health and I want you to care for mine, or whether that is digging in and doing the hard work on our own history as churches, as families, as neighborhoods, as communities. Yes, it feels heavy to me, but it helps me think of it. Oh, go ahead.
Peaceful protesting.
Indeed.
Carrying the burden together through peaceful protest. Yeah.
Thank you. Ross, where does all this sit for you as you think about this context of our conversation?
Yeah, part of what helps me is the reminder that really the whole Bible was put together during difficult times, right? And in first century Palestine, which must have been a really painful place to be, Jesus was able to look around and say, hey, look, the kingdom of God is popping up everywhere. It's popping up here. It's popping up there. And I see it coming all around me. And if Jesus was able to see that God's work was happening in that kind of environment, it gives me some hope that we can see that here. I mean, not all, but so many of his metaphors are agricultural, right? And, you plant a seed and it grows. A plant grows and it produces fruit. These are things that we don't make happen. We don't carry the weight of trying to get that seed to sprout or the plant to produce. We sort of participate in it. And at our best, I think we can participate in what God's already doing to be looking for it. There's a great line from Abraham Heschel. He's talking about the Jewish way of counting time, that the day starts in the evening and then it continues on through the next morning. And he said that when you wake up in the morning, the day is half done. God's been up to God's business all night long. And our role is to wake up and look for where it is and find a way to join in. And that helps me lessen that sense of, oh man, this is all on me to do something, to look where God's at work and try to join in. Otherwise, it does feel crushing. So maybe that's another way of talking about the communal quality, right? So.
Thank you for that. Because you offer these really beautiful, helpful questions, grab your journal, grab a pen, try this, take a look at this. I just want to invite those who are listening in whatever context to take a moment and identify the signs of resurrection that you are seeing around you. There's the big resurrection story, but we've also landed in this place of there are lots of small moments where life might be seeding. As you were speaking, Ross, I was thinking of a friend who lives in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And of course, that was where the initial protests really sprang up after the murder of George Floyd. And I think she, in feeling somewhat helpless as she was watching her greater community kind of rise up in a sense of turmoil, she was feeling, what can I do? And what she ended up doing was opening up a Zoom room like this and calling in a number of us who are part of musical communities and saying, can we keep song vigil through the night? And so we took times and set alarms and came together and just sang and put that Zoom address out there. So anyone who was maybe awake, looking at news through the night, feeling agitated, could come in and just experience a moment of peace in song. And on the one hand, you think, well, what was that really doing? And on the other hand, it felt like that was doing everything. And so I'm also really hearing in this a sense that the call of this moment might be both pointing people toward God and God's agency in all of this, but also naming or helping people to name where they have some agency, even if it feels like this is not the big fix. We have to take the next right step that's in front of us. So I appreciate, the test of a book like this is, can it adapt to different contexts and moments as they arise? Because of course, I'm guessing as you wrote, you were not anticipating all of this. If you were, you should have told us. But, I think there's wisdom here that certainly carries into these moments. So thank you for that time of acknowledgement. I also want to share, I was not smart enough to mark the page, but there is a moment where you're talking about different emotions, one of which is sorrow. This will come right away to you in a way that it won't to me, but that notion of sorrow is the doorway in. That, along with looking for resurrection, we must give ourselves time to sit at the cross and lament. And so I think there's a lot of wisdom in our Christian story to carry us through seasons like this. So I was quoting that passage that, of course, I didn't mark well enough to find, but sharing that with others. So thank you for lifting up perennial wisdom for this moment, as well as so many others yet to come. So we've referred a few times to this appendix at the end, the grade yourself, your chance to really honestly assess where you are in different areas of health. And I'm curious if you would just name and lift up some of the categories. We've done this in different ways, but it's worth almost as a recap, naming what are some of the areas of health that you are inviting ministry leaders to look at and really take that kind of long, honest look at the real as they determine steps they might take in self-care. Looks like Christina's looking at the book, which I love. We can all
I am. I was thinking, even with all the edits, I do not have this memorized.
Well, that's all right, because it's here in print.
Yes, good. The Grade Yourself exercise really is a breakdown of different areas of your life, starting with the rhythms of life. And in the book, we say a little bit more about this and then kind of point you toward grading yourself. But there's personal, professional, spiritual life, economic, affection,
joyful experience.
Joyful experience is the one I wanted to finish with because no, it's okay. It's okay. It's I think you would not expect to have this as a grade yourself area for health, but it's so important, and it's directly linked to that, the absence of self-concern. That's one of the things that you say you referred to sorrow, I referred to this one. Self-concern is the greatest obstacle to joy. And so having joyful experience be one of the areas of health, I think, is extremely important for people to think about in their lives.
I really loved that one as well. It probably was the quality of it being unexpected. I was going through and kind of seeing like, yes, of course, yes, this is a critical area. And that one did catch my eye. It struck me as, kind of being a flower in the midst, like this full bloom in a plant that was otherwise just full of green. And because I think it's a treat whenever I'm reading something to get to know the authors a little better in a personal way, I'm curious, acknowledging this context, this kind of heavy feeling time. Even in weeks like this, I expect you've each found joy. And so in the last week or two, why don't you just share a joyful experience that you've had? Ross, why don't you lead off?
Well, I'm in the Chicago area, and the Chicago Botanic Gardens, which are beautiful, have been shut down for months now. And they just opened up and gave permission for a limited number of people to walk around it, the edge of it. Couldn't go into it. But that was such a pleasure to be able to do that and see, in the midst of everything else, the plants and the birds are quite happy. They're green. It's just so marvelous to look out at a landscape and see 8 or 10 different shades of green, and it takes one out of that, I guess, ruminative state and into just an enjoyment spot. So that was a great afternoon for us.
Christina, how about you?
Well, I have to say that my greatest joy is my family, my children and my son-in-law and my grandson, who's about 3, and he is, he knows when you point a camera at him, he knows to pose and smile. So it's always, a treat. But last night, for the first time, some friends and we got together in my backyard and sat apart, and that was really not just for me, but for my friends. That was such a joyous experience because, after a month, we realized how much we missed, and it's been probably 3 months now since we've been able to do that, and we would do it on a regular basis. So Zoom is great, technology is great, but it's no substitute for face-to-face contact with people.
I agree. How about you, Jay? What has been a moment of joyful experience?
On the farm where I live, we got a bunch of people, grandson, his wife, and their daughter, Grayson, who's now 2 years old. And she is just the delight of my life, and she loves the farm and loves relating to the chickens and the goats and the cows. But lately she's been singing and dancing, and her singing is high soprano operatic singing, and that's nonstop. And it's just absolutely delightful. And it is pure joy, pure joy.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I was writing the other day on Facebook that in the midst of the protests, we happened to have taken vacation, not planful coinciding. It just was how it was. And we had one goal for that week of vacation, which was to get in our canoe and get on the Farmington River where we live. And we missed that goal every single day. You know, Monday came, didn't do it. Tuesday came, so on. And it was Sunday afternoon. And I am like a list maker. I want to check things off the list. So I can't even say that I did it for the joy. I did it because it was the unchecked item on the list. We finally took the canoe out and got on the river. And I'll admit that I went with a sense that it felt frivolous, that I should be standing watch with the world. You know, that was the day after the night where we had been singing through the night. So it felt really difficult for me to let go of holding my part of the heaviness. But we got out on the river, and I think, you know, much as you've described it, self-concern is the turning inward, then joyful experience is a way of connecting outward. I just felt like I needed to be in nature, that Mother Nature, the divine feminine, what have you, was calling me and saying, don't continue on without healing. And here is where healing is. And we have been in that canoe so many times since, you know, we are like very lazy river runners. We get out there maybe once or twice a summer. And now we're just every moment we can because we need this. So I think joy is this kind of intentional practice that we need more of us to be cultivating in this time and calling people to it. For me, it was a reminder that it wasn't turning my back on the worries of the world. It was equipping me to turn toward them from a whole place.
That illustration is a perfect illustration of why we wrote the book. That's the purpose of the book, is to help pastors see that taking time out to tend to their own soul and self-care is not it doesn't mean they don't care about the world and the issues of the world in their congregation. It means they need to do that so that they can take care of the needs of their congregation and help them, you know, carry the burdens of the world.
Amen. Amen. Well, if any of you make it to Connecticut, we're getting kayaks now too. We're branching out. Visit. So I want to close this section of our conversation with the piece that connects to my work, which looks at financial health. And, you know, in some ways, I think this often gets treated as separate, but it really is so integrated into the whole of these other pieces. And so I'm just curious for each of you, what connections you see between being financially well and serving with excellence.
Well, when there's ill health financially, it is so preoccupying. It sneaks into everything. Your family relationships, your sense of what's fair and not fair. It creeps into your attitude towards the leaders in your church, stirring up either that unhealthy self-sacrifice or a sense of entitlement. You know, I somehow I'm doing God's work, so God should be showering me with what I want. And it can be so disempowering. And when we're feeling disempowered in that realm, it just becomes toxic everywhere. And in contrast, when there's a sense of true acceptance there, I think there's really again, freedom and spaciousness that can come when you sense whatever choices you made financially, that they're in balance and they're chosen and they're almost like a spiritual discipline.
You're talking my language, because I say financial practice is spiritual practice. There's not necessarily a point of arrival, but it's a way of being day in, day out, hour after hour. And I also say the work is liberation. So I think we're absolutely on the same page. Christina,
Well,
today?
Yeah, I think that for me, why that's liberating is because you're making a conscious choice to take control of a piece in your life that is very stressful. And it's setting an intention to pay attention to how you think about money, how you use your money, how you kind of monitor your money, and that's intention. Setting the intention is also a very important piece in the book that can lead you toward a position of strength. And a lot of it starts with not judging yourself. It's not just not judging others, but it's not judging yourself in some of your things you do. But I think that taking control and being intentional about this piece in your life, which can just take over everything else, is important.
To me, it goes back to the one thing I remember from the course I took in abnormal psych. We were told that there are two ways you can absolutely ruin your kids. One is to never give them anything that they want. The other is to give them everything that they want. And by far the more damaging one is to give them everything that they want. And it reminds me that the happiest people, I think the healthiest people, are those who have most of what they feel they need and a little bit of what they want. And the most unhappy, unhealthy people are those who feel they're entitled to everything that they want.
True wisdom there. I'm going to give a shout out to my best friend Robin, who when her daughter Judy was born said, "I will give you all of what you need and some of what you want."
Yeah,
and I
right.
grabbed that wisdom. It sounds like it was given to you as well, but indeed, what a beautiful call forward. It disrupts that narrative of suffering and sacrifice that you shouldn't have what you need. It lets you kind of practice in what it is to meet your needs, which I think spills over in lots of areas of life. And then it also means that God desires that you have a taste of joy, that there's a little something that you want that is absolutely worth it. I have a few non-negotiables, and I would add those questions to this. What's the concert ticket that comes along that you are always going to buy because that experience of live music is going to carry you for the next 6 months? There's some indulgence that I hope everyone has that always feels worth the investment.
Yes.
Beautiful. Well, once again, Jay, Christina, Ross, it has been such a privilege to be with you, to talk with you about this treasure of a book, Health, Holiness, and Wholeness for Ministry Leaders. And I'm glad that we have one more opportunity planned to come together and explore this book further. We hope that people will take the time to not only purchase it. I'm sometimes a person who has the stack of 10 books waiting in the queue, but take the time to dig in, to use the tools that are here, to really assess their own health and to make some decisions following that inner leader, that inner coach, about how they can move forward toward greater excellence. So thank you each for your own ministry to ministry leaders and for this time that we've had together today.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.